Let's check in with Jacinta Price, of course, a former coalition candidate for the Northern Territory seat of Lingiari. She joins me live from Alice Springs. Thanks for joining us again, Jacinta. You've not been a strong supporter of this constitutional voice and statement of the heart because you want to focus on more practical outcomes for Indigenous Australians. Do you think what Ken Wyatt is doing here could be useful?
Look, I think Ken is doing this with all wonderful, great intentions, and the purpose behind it is for grassroots individuals to be able to be heard, which is, I think, very important because they, of course, know what the needs are within their individual communities. I think my concern with this process is possibly the fact that it is another very lengthy, very expensive process following on from one that I believe it failed when the Referendum Council was set up and then the outcome was such that they produced the Uluru Statement. I don't think it, given the resources that were poured into it, provided something of great substance in being able to move forward and address some of these issues in practical terms. I don't think it actually it set out and outlined how, through this process, issues would be addressed in practical terms. And my concern is that we might see another very lengthy process that may not produce what the government will see as something feasible and worthwhile and going forward with, possibly.
Yeah, you're right. This sort of consultation and discussion in this area has gone on for so long. The other question people would raise here is, do you think that this voice focus could be more about symbolism, because a lot of people have looked for some sort of symbolic gesture, whereas what I think what Ken Wyatt is definitely talking about is a practical way for people to actually raise issues and get action?
Yeah, again, it hasn't been outlined how exactly a voice is going to address these issues in practical terms. That there is nothing to tell us how this is going to happen, and there's no evidence to suggest that, in fact, what this framework produces is going to be the key to addressing these issues on the ground. There is no evidence to suggest that that will be the case. And for me, I'd like to see something like an audit of all legislation that has been designed to advance Indigenous people, to see whether any of that legislation, those parts of the legislation that have worked, and a focus on supporting that going forward, and looking at what legislation hasn't worked and isn't working. And things like, again, I say it a lot, the Land Rights Act being reviewed in order to better support traditional owners and land tenure and their ability to use their land for economic development how they see fit. I still see a lot of obstacles in the way with that process. And this other process of creating this voice, again, is a distraction from being able to address those other issues more clearly and more practically. I mean, if the aim is to create this voice to address those issues more clearly and more practically, well, then I'm all for it. But there is no evidence thus far to prove that this process is going to be that process that takes us there.
I suppose all the evidence thus far, though, shows that whatever has been in place is not working. We all know that ATSIC was supposed to give Indigenous people a lot of opportunity to get things done themselves. It became a corrupted organisation. We know there's been, as you say, extensive consultation around other proposals. But as we just heard from Ken Wyatt, you've still got Indigenous communities where they're not getting basic services that they need, and they haven't even had any contact with their local MPs. This seems almost inconceivable.
Yeah, look, the one thing that resonated very deeply with me with what Ken just spoke about was the fact that I agree. I think members should spend more time speaking to their constituents directly. I think constituents should be able to have better access to their members to know exactly what their needs are on the ground. And, it's a difficult thing, particularly for the Northern Territory, where you have a member. Well, we have very few members. We have the two senators and the two lower house representatives that have to cover very vast distances to see what the needs are in communities. And this has been the problem for a very long time, is the fact that in these very remote communities, a lot of the time people are out of sight and out of mind. So I see where the intentions are behind this process, but I'm still very reserved about it. And again, yeah, I would encourage all members to get out and to speak to people more directly and face to face.